Greetings, everyone. I hope that you are doing well and had a great weekend. Had great services of worship in your ministry context this past Sunday, and are continuing to grow in your delight of God as you continue through this course, through the material that we discuss and the things that we look at. I hope that this is more than just good educational knowledge for you, but that it truly is helping you increase in your delight of God as you worship in your churches on Sundays, or whenever that might be if it's not on Sundays. A little different setting for our video this week. Not in my office. I'm in my home actually, so a little duller of a background, just kind of a gray wall behind here. So apologize for that. But I wanted to be sure to get this video out. I had another one I was going to use, but as I've been reflecting on some things, I want to do a new video because there's a couple things that I'd like to make changes on actually that hopefully will benefit you, benefit the course overall, and hopefully not be too frustrating for anybody. But first, let's begin with just looking at this week. This week we're looking at weddings and funerals, or marriage and funerals, I think is how it's listed. But weddings and funerals, marriage and funerals, and what do those look like as services of worship? A lot of times we don't think of them as worship services because we might kind of innocently compartmentalize worship for the Sunday morning gathering or that gathering of the community in that sense. But what does it mean for a wedding to be a worship service, or a funeral to be a service of worship as well? How do we make these services God-oriented so that we are inviting people into worship? We are proclaiming the Christ event through these, and it's not so human-oriented. We celebrate these individuals in particular ways in weddings and funerals, but there's a larger narrative, there's a larger story that they point to, and in that we're drawn into worship of the triune God in significant ways. So kind of thinking about that, looking at that, what does that mean? What does that look like practically? What's some of the history behind that and things. So I've provided a little bit of material for you online. There's really not a lot to read or to do this week. There's a little bit online, a couple articles that I wrote very briefly that you can read and educate yourself a little bit more on that. And then I ask some questions at the end. And so for the forum assignment, all I want you to do is look at those questions, pick one from the article on marriage, one from the article on funerals, and answer those questions, one question from each in a forum post. As you're reflecting on those things, how do you see a marriage or a funeral service in a broader sense of worship? So yeah, we're just going to reflect on that. We're going to think about it. Like I said, there's not much reading. There's not many resources I've provided on this. Honestly, there's just not a lot of resources in general on marriage and funerals as services of worship. Some people will talk about them or mention them briefly. There's really good denominational resources if you go into a book of worship or the Book of Common Prayer, or things like that. The Nazarene Handbook on Worship, stuff like that you can find. Lutheran books of worship. They'll talk about marriage and funerals. Catholic resources will, but seeing more in terms of sacrament and all that. But from a Protestant standpoint, especially an evangelical Protestant, if you consider yourself part of that movement, it's hard to find anything. So two resources that I highly recommend, and this isn't specifically in an evangelical camp or whatever, but they can fit more broadly to think about marriages and funerals as services worship. The first one is Constance Cherry's The Special Services Worship Architect. So we have the Worship Architect that we've used for this course, and there's a supplemental resource to that called the Special Services Worship Architect. So it's looking at things like marriage and funerals and other special services that we might conduct throughout the year, or things that might come up in our ministries that we need to be aware of. I didn't require it because there's only those 2 chapters that I would want you to read out of it, and I didn't feel right making you pay for a whole book to only get those 2 chapters. So I read it myself and then wrote those articles based on some of the reading out of there and my own reflections and studies and things. And then the second book that you also see mentioned in those articles is James White's Introduction to Christian Worship. So Constance Cherry's The Special Services Worship Architect and James White's An Introduction to Christian Worship are both good resources where you can find material on marriages and funerals as services of worship. So recommend those to you if you'd like to look those up. If you're looking for resources, then those can be good. But hopefully this is at least sparking some thought with what I've provided this week for you. and you can start looking at and thinking about funerals and marriages in a broader sense, where we're not so much just focusing on the individuals here and celebrating the individuals. We're looking broader and thinking of how is this worship of God, and how is all of this brought up into that worship of God. And that's not to say we neglect the individuals, that this is honoring or the covenant that is being made between the individuals, but we do recognize that this is to glorify God in a greater sense. So.